Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 14, Section 2, talking about early South American civilizations. So we're going to start with Nazca. The Nazca appeared around 200 BC in what is now southern Peru, and they prospered until about AD 600. Unlike the Chauvin, the Nazca did not build great temples and may have practiced their religion outdoors. And one of the things that the Nazca people are kind of known for, and it might be tied into religion, are these things called the Nazca lines, which are grooves that have been etched into the rocky soil of southern Peru. And they're shaped in the form of birds and humans and geometric figures such as triangles and trapezoids and spirals. The deal is that the Nazca lines are so huge, so large, and that their shapes really so perfect that they can only be seen from space. In other words, if you were basically at ground level, you might not be able to see the vastness of the size or the detail. But if you were flying over it or if you were using satellite photography, certainly you could see that. And that's kind of led to a lot of people speculating that maybe the Nazca might have been aliens or something odd like that. But needless to say, the things that they were doing are mind-boggling, and hence it definitely has the maybe the attention of a lot of archaeologists and anthropologists trying to figure out what was going on down there. Anyway, moving on, we're going to talk about the Mochi. And the Mochi civilization lasted about 400 years from around 300 AD to about the 700 ADs, or roughly 700 years or so before the rise of the Incas. And anyway, the location of the Mochi civilization uh, is along the western coast, south of the equator, near what is now present day Ecuador. A major urban area or center rose near the irrigated fields of the valley of the Mochi River near the foothills of the Andes Mountains. And the one thing that I would have you note, if you take a look at the photo to the right here, is that a lot of their farm ground obviously was kind of up in the foothills. Their ground is terraced. And part of that was one to allow for them to be able to plant a crop without having a lot of issues with soil erosion and such. But it's just mind boggling what they were able to do with such limited resources as far as mechanization and things like that. All this was done by hand. The Mochis were a very politically powerful state with authority over around 400 miles of land. People led lives centered around warfare. And the Mochi had no written language, but they did like pottery. And so their pottery is actually what has given us some insight about their culture. To me, it's very similar to some of the pottery that you might have seen out of ancient Greece. Incas. The Incas emerged in the valleys of the mountainous ranges of the Andes, and the Inca Empire eventually included all of present day Peru and much of Chile and parts of Ecuador and Bolivia and also Argentina. Anyway, under the leadership of a man named Pachacuti, the Incas created a strong government, included complex systems of tribute collections. Okay, a tribute collection is money that you have to pay to somebody who's powerful. Okay, it's kind of like a tax, but sometimes it's paid by other governmental leaders, maybe in a way to get favors. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the mafia, but not quite. Anyway, they had courts, they had trade inspections, they also had work regulations, all of this by the time of the 1400s. So the Incas really had a very sophisticated civilization. Anyway, when you talk about their political organization, uh, certainly their system of government kind of reminds me a lot of the bureaucracy that you might see in modern day political systems. You had a leader, your emperor, you had quarter governors, you had provincial governors. Quarter governors would be to me kind of like state governors. Provincial might be more at the county level, and the subjects were like the ordinary people. Anyway, all Incas were um, subjects were to provide forced labor several weeks out of the year, and laborers were moved according to the need from one part of the empire to another to take part in building projects. Some of the things that they were building were a vast system or network of roads. And some of these roads that were built, in the 1400s still exist today in the Andes. Anyway, in Inca society, men and women were required to select their marriage partners from within their own immediate tribal group. After marriage, women were expected to care for the children and to weave cloth. Some girls were chosen to serve as priestesses in temples, and Inca women, unlike Aztec, could not own property. All right, the Inca economy was based on agriculture, where the people planted corn and potatoes and other crops suited for the high altitude mountains. For the most part, were terraced, very much like the mochi that I was showing you a little earlier. And they also were irrigated as well. So the Incas were pretty sophisticated, but if you're taking a look at some of the terrace fields that you might see in this image here, certainly is pretty mind-boggling that they were able to do this again, just with human labor. Anyway, the Incas built an extensive trade network for long-distance trade. They also built a system of some 24,800 miles of roads. A lot of that built by manpower. We mentioned before that the Incas were required to give service every year. Anyway, these roads extend from like modern day Colombia, which is kind of the most northern country today that's in present day South America, all the way down to the southern city of Santiago, Chile. Anyway, trained runners or messengers in this case carried messages rapidly, allowing information to travel up and down basically the network system. But some of these runners were extreme athletes. They run roughly 140 miles in a single day, which is insane. Anyway, going on. Um, Machu Picchu, which is probably one of the most famous um, ancient cities built by the Incas. It was built on a hilltop roughly 8,000 feet above sea level near the Urubamba River. This is a city that contains roughly 200 buildings and a population of roughly 1,200 people. Anyway, it's difficult to determine the purpose of some of these ancient sites because the Incas did not have a written language. So there's really no records about how Machu Picchu was really used. But I think anthropologists and archaeologists have a lot of insight just by some of the dwellings that they had found there. Anyway, Incas used something known as quipu, which you might see off here to the right, as a way to kind of keep track of the records. It was actually a system of knots that were tied onto ropes, and this allowed for people to kind of keep track of their maybe the tallies of bushels of grain and such, but such as the number of men who might go into warfare or the number of goods that were exchanged. Anyway, the Incas number system was based around units of 10. All right, thank you very much.